Chester, Whitley Castle, Old Penrith, Old Carlisle, Kermote, Pap Castle, Maryport, Beckfoot. The wall runs for almost 73 miles. A Roman mile was 1,000 paces, about 1,481 metres. That is 0.92 of a modern mile. Building methods. Remains of various types of building materials have been found, as the Romans used whatever was available nearby. Early parts of the wall were built of turf, stone and wood. Later parts were built only in stone. To make the most of natural features like ridges of rock, the wall was not built in a straight line like Roman roads were. This meant that the wall could have better links with existing forts of the northern frontier, such as the large fort at Vindolanda. Experts think that it would have taken more than 15,000 men to build Hadrian's wall. Soldiers from all three of the occupying Roman legions were used to build the wall, as well as the legionnaires. Members of the legions. There were auxiliaries. Extra workers from local tribes were also used. But did you know that Hadrian's wall may have been as high as 6 metres and as wide as 3 metres in some places? Now in this picture, this is a reconstruction of the wall at Vindolanda, showing what the earliest sections of it looked like when it was made from turf and wood. What do we know about life on Hadrian's inches thick, and they were square in shape. Between each pair of mile castles, there were 2 turrets that were around 9 metres tall. Inside the turret was a stair or ladder to the top, and you can see that here in this illustration. Historians believe this led to a viewing platform on the roof of the building. This would have been a good place to get a clear vision of the landscape. There are 80 known mile castles along the length of Hadrian's Wall and 158 turrets. Soldiers of the Wall. When a place was conquered by the Romans, it became part of the empire. When that happened, men from those countries became soldiers of Rome. The legionnaires based in the forts of Hadrian's Wall were from all over the empire. There were regiments from Spain, France, Germany, and even from as far away as Syria and North Africa. We know this because of inscriptions on stone plaques found along the wall that gave the details of the regiments stationed there. Each regimental unit would have been made up of infantry soldiers, that's soldiers on foot, or cavalry, soldiers on horseback, and sometimes both. A unit contained up to 1,000 men. When not on patrol, most men would have been in the fort. Some soldiers would have been sent to fetch supplies further away. And here is an example of a soldier on horseback. In the cavalry barracks, the soldiers shared space with their horses as the stables were attached to their sleeping areas. In the forts, the soldiers slept in buildings still not very good at mending my own kit, and a leather worker in the Vickers at Finlanda has been a great help. There is truth in the stories of the cold and wet, though. This is definitely not Hispania. The barracks are crowded and smelly, and one of the men in my contubernium snores like a bear. With 8 of us sharing it is not easy to sleep. The rain can set in for days, and at night, when we patrol along the dark stretches of the wall, it is hard to remember home at all. I am thankful for my wool birras. Send extra socks and warmer subligaluca in your next parcel. Life for Britons near the wall. Britons lived along the whole length of Hadrian's wall, but what was life really like for those who lived so close to the Romans? The Romans had occupied Britain for about 100 years by the time Hadrian's wall was built. While many tribes regularly fought with the Romans, most people had been forced to adjust to life alongside them. Many tribes relied on the Romans for trade. The forts of the northern frontier were already places of trade, and settlements had grown along the length of the Roman roads long before the wall was built. This is an artist's illustration of tribes along the wall providing the Romans with goods such as meat, grain, and leather. Taxes. Archaeologists have found evidence of thousands of historic features from the time of the Romans. These include the remains of settlements, farms, and mines that once belonged to British peoples. Some historians believe that for many tribes, the wall was an opportunity. It meant that they could trade more easily with the wealthy Romans. The local traders would have paid money to the Romans in the form of taxes. The Romans would have taken a percentage of the money that the local traders made from selling their goods. The Romans may also have taken a fee for passing safely through the gates of the wall. Now, down here, these strange-looking things are Roman shoes, or the remnants of Roman shoes. They help us to build up a picture of the lives of the people who lived near the wall during the Roman occupation of Britain. Life in a Vickers. The Vickers may also have been home to many Britons. They would have been craftspeople or traders, and people who worked alongside the fort in trades connected to leisure. Thousands of women would also have lived near the Roman forts. Many of these women would be the wives of the soldiers. There would also have been many children, as these were sons and daughters of the soldiers and the Britons working around the forts. We know that women and children lived at the Vickers because archaeological evidence like tombstones, herb bins, women's jewellery and children's toys have been found. In this image we can see that just outside the fort at Finlanda there was a very large settlement where people lived and worked. The growth of the Vickers would have meant a huge change in the lives of the tribes people around the wall. Even if they did not live in the Vickers, the local people may have visited to trade goods in the marketplace or to enjoy Roman luxuries such as baths. For many people, life in the Vickers was good, as they would have had access to benefits such as education and medicine. They would also have been able to buy luxury goods such as wine soldiers were allowed to marry Britons, their families would have lived in the settlements close to the forts. This might be the kind of letter that the daughter of a legionnaire based in Britain would write to her father's relatives in Rome. So this is from Regina. Says, Salve, dearest cousin Flavia. I am so excited that you and your father are coming to visit. My brother secretly told me that the men are going to the shrine of Mithras. We can spend time together when they are busy. I am offering votives for the weather to stay fine enough for the roads to stay open. Father has bought in enough liquamen to last the whole winter. In case the snow comes, the smell is everywhere. My mother is not hiding the fact that she does not like these new Roman gods, but she did marry a Roman legionnaire. I am happy to give praise to as many gods as necessary if it means that you can visit. Mother has a shrine in the house for her British gods, and so does Father for the Roman ones. Sometimes it feels like they spend all their time at a lavarium. I had better finish my letter now, as my brother will be home from his tutor soon. I do wish that I was allowed to have schooling. Anything would be better than a day filled with household chores. I would love to learn more than just reading and writing. All I am allowed to learn is how to sew and cook and clean. Life is so boring here for a girl. I am so looking forward to seeing you again. Bring all the news from the Forum of Rome, and maybe one day I will be allowed to visit the land of my father's birth, too. Hadrian's Wall after the Romans. Roman control of Britain stopped in AD 410, and gradually the wall was abandoned. It fell into disrepair. Most of its stone was used by local people to build houses